Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the tussle over Shiv Sena's party symbol and the Election Commission's latest order regarding it. We also talk about the scientists who won the Nobel Prize for Medicine this year. But first, we talk about caste discrimination. Last week, the centre appointed a 3-member commission that will look at whether the Scheduled Caste status should be granted to those who have historically belonged to the SC community but have now converted to religions other than Hinduism, Buddhism or Sikhism. So this mainly concerns Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims, who are actually not happy about this commission being set up. In this segment, Indian Express's Esha Roy joins us to talk about why that is the case. Esha, could you talk about the reason why this commission has been set up and where the idea of it comes from?
So the commission has been set up because there has been a demand from the Dalit Christian and Dalit Muslim communities to extend the Scheduled Caste status to these communities as well. According to the President Order of 1950, the Scheduled Caste was only extended to Hindus and later to Sikhs in 1956 and Buddhists in 1990. However, it was not extended to the Dalits who happened to convert to Islam or to Christianity. And they maintain that this should be done because they continue to be discriminated against as Dalits, and conversion of religion has not given them any respite. So there has been a demand for this for a very long time now. As a matter of fact, the first case was filed in 2004 in the Supreme Court by the Center for Public Interest Litigation, which is an NGO, along with Franklin Caesar Thomas, who also happens to be an advocate with the latest case. So since 2004, there were several cases filed in the Supreme Court. These have now been clubbed together. And the latest case in January 2020, the Supreme Court agreed to look at the PIL filed by the National Council of Dalit Christians, which has requested the Supreme Court and the government to revisit the Scheduled Caste list and to consider adding Dalit Christians to this list.
Right, and now this commission will be headed by the former Chief Justice of India, KG Balakrishnan. Could you talk about what all will this 3-member commission look at?
Yes, so the notification that the Ministry of Social Justice has come out with has said that the essential function of the commission will be to consider, whether they can add new persons who have historically belonged to the Scheduled Caste, this is their exact words, but have converted to other religions to the overall Scheduled Caste list. So apart from looking at studying these particular communities, that is the Muslim and Christian Dalits who seek the categorization, the commission will also be looking at those who already exist as Scheduled Caste communities and how this sort of inclusion of new communities can affect their status or affect their situation. They've also said that this is an extremely historically sensitive and complex exercise that will be carried out. So they have to look at every angle carefully, including looking at whether the discrimination that these communities have claimed by virtue of not being added into the list is actually taking place. So the social inequality, discrimination, backwardness, economic and educational backwardness that has been claimed by the Christian and Muslim Dalits, the committee will study that and determine that as well.
And how have the Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslim organizations reacted to this committee being set up? What kind of things have we heard from them?
There has been great outcry against the forming of this commission from both the Dalit Christian community as well as the Dalit Muslim community. Of course, the Supreme Court 2020 case, which is being heard right now, the Muslims are not a part of it. It is specifically the National Council of Dalit Christians along with other Dalit Christian bodies which are a part of this case. However, they have very similar views across the board. Their views being that this is a delaying tactic by the government, because since the Supreme Court is hearing this case, in August this year, they had asked the center to submit a reply to the Supreme Court on the status or the position of the government on the issue. And they believe that as a response to that, instead of submitting a reply, what the government has done is they've decided to set up this commission, and the report for which will only be submitted in another 2 years. So they feel that this is a delaying tactic by the government, which can now turn around and say that, look, we're studying the issue. So once we conclusively can determine whether this should be done or not, only then can we submit a reply to the Supreme Court. And there's quite a bit of anger amongst these communities.
Yeah, and the other thing is that there have been other committees that have been set up in the past just for this very purpose, right?
There have been numerous commissions, committees set up to study this. One of the most, which is cited by everyone, is the Ranganath Mishra Committee, which was set up in 2004. And the Ranganath Mishra Committee had recommended delinking of a scheduled caste status from religion, and rightfully so, because what the members of both these communities have pointed out is that the hope when they were converting, the hope was that because the people who have converted do belong or are Dalits and do belong to the lower caste. So the hope was that when they converted to Christianity and to Islam, that they will no longer be lower caste and they will no longer be treated as Dalits, and they will no longer have to face untouchability. That has not been the case. History has proved otherwise. They continue to face severe discrimination, including untouchability. As a matter of fact, one of the members of groups was telling me how in Tamil Nadu they have a 2-tumbler system still, where in tea stalls, in eateries, they keep 2 different tumblers or glasses to serve tea in, one for the upper caste and the other for Dalits. And this doesn't just mean Dalit Hindus, but it also includes Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims.
Right, so even after converting to another religion, they still face discrimination, including untouchability. They do not lose any of that after converting.
Yes, what they have lost, however, is the scheduled caste status by virtue of the fact that it's not extended to these religions, as a result of which they don't have reservation in jobs and in educational institutions, which means that anyway economically and socially backward community becomes even more backward than their Hindu brothers and sisters who do have access to these reservations. But what they're pointing out is that even more important than the reservation issue is that of protection, which the SC and SD Prevention of Atrocities Act provides scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities, that when there is discrimination or acts of violence against these communities, they can approach the police, which then can file a complaint under this act, which has very stringent provisions, imprisonment and penal provisions. But they can't do that. Whereas their people continue to be discriminated against. Dalit women are raped in riots and clashes, just as Dalit Hindus are attacked, so are Dalit Christians and Muslims. So whereas the Hindus and the Buddhists and the Sikhs can approach the police, these guys cannot approach the police under this particular act, at least.
And Esha, could you talk about how political parties, including the BJP, have reacted to these demands and commissions in the past?
Yes, in the past there have been several committees which were set up, including the Ranganath Mishra Committee in 2004. There was another one by the National Commission for Minorities that set up a committee in 2008 with its lead author Satish Deshpande, who also recommended that this scheduled caste status should be extended to Dalits belonging to the Christian and Muslim communities. However, this led to a lot of political division. I think the CPIM supported these reports and said that this should definitely be done. Barring them, the Congress largely remained silent. The BJP had actually rejected the Ranganath Mishra Committee report and had said that these communities should not be included in the ST list by virtue of the fact that this is a Hindu social order and social structure, and the Christians and Muslims simply don't have the caste system. That was their argument against inclusion of these communities.
And next we talk about the Shiv Sena. Back in June, senior Shiv Sena leader Eknath Shinde revolted against the party, took the majority of the MLAs with him and formed a new faction. This faction then allied with the BJP and formed the new government in Maharashtra. And since then, both factions have been fighting over who should be recognized as the real Shiv Sena. Should it be the rebel camp under Eknath Shinde, or should it be the one led by Uddhav Thackeray? And this fight between the two camps is right now centered around who will get to use the party's original symbol in elections, which is represented by a bow and arrow. Now, in the middle of this ongoing tussle, the Election Commission on Saturday decided to freeze the party symbol, which means that neither of the two factions will be able to use the symbol until the commission decides who it actually belongs to. In this segment, Indian Express's Ritika Chopra, who reports on the Election Commission, joins us to talk about how the commission will do so. Ritika, could you begin by talking about what has led the EC to freeze Shiv Sena's election symbol?
The Election Commission only comes into the picture when there is a split in a recognized national party or a recognized state party, because the symbols order deals with that. So, as far as the Shiv Sena matter is concerned, as we all know that there is a split within the party, and there is a faction which is led by Eknath Shinde, and there's a faction headed by Uddhav Thackeray. And obviously, both these factions are now fighting over the party symbol, because the party symbol is intrinsically linked to pretty much the identity of the party, even though this is a symbol which is given by the Election Commission to the party. But over a period of time, after a party has fought several elections, the party's name and the symbol are pretty much intertwined and, part of its identity and very crucial to a party's performance in an election over a period of time. So currently, these two factions, and we all know about it, that they are fighting over which is the real Shiv Sena. And as part of that fight, they also are fighting over the party symbol, which is the bow and arrow symbol. And these factions had approached the Election Commission, asking the commission to resolve this dispute, because it actually has the powers to resolve this dispute under the symbols order.
And Ritika, how unusual is all this for EC to freeze a party symbol?
It's not very unusual for the commission to freeze a party symbol, especially at a time when there is an impending election around the corner. The idea is not, to ensure that either of the two sections don't have an edge over the other. And given that these hearings take time, it takes the commission some time to decide these matters. So as an ad hoc arrangement, what it does is, if needed, like for instance, in this case, there is a by-poll that's around the corner. I think that's being held in the first week of November. Because of this situation, in these circumstances, what the commission normally does, the precedence is for the commission to freeze the party symbol and ask these two factions to kind of identify themselves through relatively different names. And then the commission, as part of that ad hoc arrangement, will give them two different symbols from the list of free symbols.
Okay, so for the by-polls, which in Maharashtra are scheduled to take place next month, these two factions would not be able to use the original bow and arrow symbol, but instead would have to pick from the list of free symbols that are available.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And Ritika, how will the EC actually decide which of the two factions should get to use the original symbol? Could you talk about that?
So the commission's hearings in these matters of split within a recognized national or a state party, these are long drawn proceedings, essentially where the commission will hear both sides or both factions to figure out which faction enjoys the maximum support within the party. And that can take time. The established practice, and something that the commission usually heavily relies on in the most reliable practice here, is for the EC to see which faction has the maximum number of MLAs and MPs of the party supporting it. That's the easiest way to do this. Although commission, what it would often say is that, it looks at support not only within the elected members of the party, as in by that I mean members elected to the assembly or the parliament, but also within the elected members of the party organization. As you know, every political party does have its own structures, does have internal elections, and they have office bearers elected as well. So the commission actually tries to see which faction enjoys the most support, both from the MPs, MLAs of that party, as well as the office bearers. But the easiest and the quickest way to do it is, if a certain faction enjoys overwhelming support from the MPs and MLAs of that party, that makes the commission's job easier. And that's how the EC usually decides these matters. But how do you actually figure out, how do you establish this support? So what the commission usually expects each of the factions to do is to submit documents in its favor. Then each of those factions end up submitting signed affidavits from these MPs and MLAs, kind of sort of swearing their support to a certain faction. And then those documents are studied by the commission. The commission will also, if needed, hold hearings per se, kind of act like a quasi-judicial body, if you can say, in such matters, hear both sides, and then eventually give its verdict in such matters.
Okay, so you mentioned that this is a long drawn process, but do we have any idea how long can it actually take?
I mean, it has sometimes even taken up to a year because, sometimes it gets a little confusing where both sides may just end up submitting affidavits signed by the same MP or MLA. At some level, maybe it's also then the onus in a way on the commission to figure out, which side is this MP or MLA on, really. So I don't know if this is really a tactic to buy time, but, there have been instances when the factions, would submit documents running into thousands of pages. And the commission only has a limited number of officers. So, it frankly isn't easy for the commission to decide these matters. And they would rather have factions resolve this internally. But of course, in case of Shiv Sena, where, both factions are at each other's throat and, a split seems imminent, the commission won't really have a choice but to decide this matter. And like I mentioned, the test that they usually use to figure out which faction is the real party, it will try to figure out which faction enjoys the most support amongst the elected MPs and MLAs of the party.
And what happens after the EC has decided in one faction's favor? Will the other faction have to choose a new symbol and essentially come up with a new party name?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if hypothetically, let's say if Eknath Shinde's faction were to be recognized as the Shiv Sena party, then the other faction, or just vice versa, the other faction obviously will not be able to use the exact same name. Maybe a name which might indicate its linkage to the old party in some way, but it won't be, like for instance, when Trinamool Congress was formed, it did have the word Congress in it, but the name is still very distinctly different. So yes, it will have to pick a new name and register itself as a new party. It will, just by virtue of Shiv Sena being, say, a state party, the other faction, whichever faction is not recognized as the original Shiv Sena, will not automatically also get a state party status. It will have to register itself as a new party. And whether or not it eventually becomes a state party or not, national party in the future, all of that would depend on this new faction's performance, or rather, should I say that this new party's performance in subsequent elections. But yes, a new name and it will get a new symbol.
And in the end, we talk about the Nobel Prize. Last week, the Nobel Committee finished announcing the winners for this year in the field of physics, medicine, chemistry, literature, and peace. In Friday's episode, we had talked about the 3 scientists who won the Nobel Prize for physics this time. And today, we shine the spotlight on the man who won in the field of medicine. A Swedish scientist who is considered one of the founders of paleogenetics, the field that looks at the DNA of ancient organisms, including ancient people. This man is Svante Pääbo. And the reason he received the prize was because he developed new and innovative methodologies to extract clean DNA from human fossils that are tens of thousands of years old, and managed to read the genetic information contained in them. And to talk about the significance of this, we are joined by Indian Express's Amitabh Sinha, who writes on science for the newspaper. So Amitabh, regular DNA analysis is obviously very common, and it can tell us a lot about a person's characteristics, physical traits, ancestry, and a whole lot of other things. But what is so special and challenging about doing DNA analysis of fossils that are thousands of years old?
So now the key to getting a genetic analysis done is to have a sample. And if a sample is being taken from a live person, a person like you and me, it's fairly straightforward after that, and you will get a very good DNA sample. Now, in this particular case, we are talking about DNA samples from fossils that are tens of thousands of years old. Now, this presents a huge kind of difficulty, and till Pääbo arrived on the scene, it couldn't be done. And one of the reasons is one, of course, it's possible to get DNA from those fossils. So it's not something that's fantasy. It is possible to get it. But the problem is that DNA decomposes over time. And over such long periods of time, the amount of DNA that is remaining in these fossils would be very, very small. So you need to be very, very careful while to be able to extract that DNA. But the second problem with that kind of extraction is that there is likely to be some amount of contamination, and with other organisms, their DNA getting mixed up with the fossil, or maybe human DNA. I mean, people in later generations might have come in contact with those fossils and inadvertently deposited their own DNA on those fossils. So the contamination posed a major problem, and this is where Pääbo is supposed to have made a real difference over several years of time.
Right, and he was the one who developed different methodologies and procedures for extracting clean DNA and avoiding contamination. He even designed these so-called clean rooms dedicated to handling ancient DNA, and which was a major breakthrough in this field of paleogenetics. So could you talk about the major discoveries and findings that came to light after these procedures were devised by Pääbo?
Yeah. So basically, what he was able to do was to do the genetic sequencing of Neanderthals for the first time. Now, Neanderthals, they belong to the same family as humans, basically. They have different, and they were more or less, for at least 20,000 years, they were living simultaneously with modern day man. The earliest modern day man and the last generations of Neanderthals basically coexisted with each other. So this guy, Pääbo, was able to sequence the gene of Neanderthals for the first time, and he was able to show what is the similarity and differences between modern man and Neanderthals. What he was also able to establish, and that was quite surprising and very, very exciting at that point of time, was that Neanderthals and humans could actually mate with each other. They could interbreed, and he was actually able to find skeletons which were like 4 generations from the mating between a modern day man and a Neanderthal. So that kind of things he was able to establish. And the other very remarkable thing which is credited with was the discovery of a completely new subspecies in this human category. Humans have lots of these subspecies in the Homo family, as they're called. So we are sapiens, but there are other subfamilies in the Homo family, and we were not aware of one particular one. So because he was able to do the genetic analysis on different fossils from very old age, so he stumbled upon a completely new sort of genetic sequence which did not belong to the sapiens, which did not belong to Neanderthals. And he was able to surmise, and he was able to show that there was another subspecies of humans that had existed around the same time. And those were later called Denisova. And these people were called Denisovans. So their discovery of Denisovans is something that is entirely credited to him.
Yeah, and both the genome sequencing of Neanderthals and the discovery of Denisovans have been major events. And in fact, you spoke to experts and scientists in India about Pääbo's work. What did they have to tell you about the impact that Pääbo has had on their work and research, and how that kind of genetic analysis has helped them?
So now, genetic analysis tools give you very direct evidence about the humans that existed at that point of time, and also their behavior, how they interacted, where did they come from, who did they mix with, who did they marry into, kind of community interactions that was taking place, and how did they migrate, where did they come from, and where did they go after that. So a lot of these things, this new information which was not available earlier and is coming out now thanks to these new tools, and it's being applied in some of the excavations in India as well. And you would have heard of these excavations that came out of Rakhigadi, that's a place in Haryana. And over the last, since the last 8-10 years, there have been completely new information that's coming out from that place. And a lot of that has to be attributed to genetic analysis, which is, as I said, a relatively new tool. It wasn't applied earlier. Now, this tool, the methodologies that Indian scientists have been using is slightly different from what Pääbo uses, mainly because there is a huge difference in the time periods that they are investigating. We are talking about time periods of 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. Pääbo was talking about, he's dealing with fossils that are 40, 50, 60,000 years old. So there's huge difference in the time periods. So mainly to account for that, the methodologies have to be modified, and that's what the Indian scientists have done. But fairly good amount of work, very rigorous published work has been going on in India as well, using more or less the same kind of methodologies that Pääbo devised.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.